when we talk about ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they use Islam to justify their violence. And just as you are afraid of it, I am afraid of it. Muslims have been the greatest, overwhelming number of victims to ISIS. I mean, every day when you hear about bombings and things like that, they're happening in Pakistan, they're happening in Syria, they're happening in Iraq. I mean, they're targeting anyone who practices Islam or doesn't practice Islam in a way that does not align with their thinking.
Welcome to Reaching Out. I'm your host, Zack Carter. Please join me as I speak with a diverse group of people to find out their thoughts on religion, politics, and culture. Hey, welcome everyone to Reaching Out with Zack Carter. I'm your host, Zack Carter. Today's interview was with a lovely woman named Mona Siddiqui. I pronounced that right?
Siddiqui.
Siddiqui.
Yes.
Siddiqui, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pumped to bring you in today. One of the things that the show is all about is to bring in people with lots of different perspectives. And I brought in a lot of Christians. I brought in people that are secularists, but I've yet to interview someone that's Muslim. And so I'm really excited to begin diving into that topic. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure, I would be happy to. First of all, thank you so much for having me.
Sure.
I appreciate an opportunity to have a platform. And especially with such a diverse group of audience that you have. And yes, I do identify as a practicing Muslim. It was the faith that I was born into. I love my faith and I consider myself a spiritual person. I am by no means a scholar of Islam or an authority in any way. I would identify as a person who loves God, and I feel comfort in worshiping God in the ways taught by Islam. And so I say that because as we talk today, I want to be clear that I'm not speaking for all Muslims. I can only speak as an individual who practices Islam with my own personal interpretations of the Quran. And, I will say that I'm not quite as regular in my ritualistic practices as my parents are or as a lot of my friends are. And my interpretation may be considered a little bit more on the sort of liberal interpretations of many Muslims that I do know. But my faith in God is certainly a core tenet. It's important to me, and it's central in shaping my values and my worldview.
Okay, great.
So.
Well, and your parents were from Pakistan, right?
Yes.
They were first generation
Americans, first generation Americans or immigrants.
Yeah.
My father was actually born in India, in Ambala, India, and he when the partition happened in 1947, when British India morphed into India and Pakistan. He was a Muslim in a Hindu majority area, so he fled.
Okay.
To Pakistan.
Was it because he was afraid of violence? Or?
Well, his whole family fled in fear of violence because they were Muslim. And it happened both ways. It happened, Hindus were fleeing what is now modern-day Pakistan, Sikhs especially in like Lahore, and they were going, it was kind of like Muslims and Hindus going in opposite directions. So it was a really terrible time, and so I think he was 7 when that happened, and so he basically left everything.
Wow.
And left barefoot actually.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And so, but my mom was born later. She was born in Pakistan later, but that's where they're from.
Okay.
And so his second immigration experience was coming to the United States.
Okay. Wow. That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
an amazing story. So I watched your TED Talk. I thought it was super interesting. I encourage anyone who's listening to this to go over and listen to the TED Talk after they listen to this podcast, because it's super interesting. You kind of begun the talk saying that in this country, Muslims are highly disliked and distrusted in the community. So I think part of the way that we can start connecting and tearing down some of these barriers is not by avoiding tough questions, but by discussing the concerns that people have. And so I want to get to that a little later. I first want to start talking about what it's like being a Muslim in America.
Okay.
And we'll kind of go into the harder questions progressively. So we don't want to just attack it all at once right at the beginning. But I'd love to hear what what it's like. What is your impression of what it's like to be a Muslim in America at this time?
Sure. And as you know, I thought about this actually, because I mean, not that I knew you were going to ask me, but of course that's sort of, you know, you want to know my story, and so I'll start chronological if that's okay. That's the best way for me to explain how I identify as a Muslim. So, you know, as you said, my parents are immigrants, first-generation Americans, and so when they came here, it was really important for them to preserve their culture, their heritage, their conservative practice of their faith, and all of that, and sort of instill that into their children, me. And so they had the typical stereotypes of American culture, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you know, how we all Americans are, right? And so for me, it was a significant challenge growing up as a Muslim, in the sense that, you know, my parents are saying that we are different and you are different and we want you to be different. Yeah. And where I just kind of wanted to fit in, you know, with the folks that I was around, and I did not really know any Muslims growing up, and so everyone in my school where I went to Meadowbrook High School was either white or black, or there were actually, you know, I remember it was a long time ago, but it was like two Indians. One of them was a valedictorian who I still keep in touch with, and then I think there were a handful of Asian, in the sense like Korean and Vietnamese, just a few folks, but there were no Muslims that I knew of. In fact, I'm pretty confident about this because most Muslims living in Richmond in the 80s, we all knew each other, and we socialized with each other every weekend, Sunday school, evening parties, and I think because of this, I think maybe why I was very, very shy in school, and I was shy and quiet and studious, and I think I fit all the Asian stereotypes that we have today. And you know, during that time, I didn't really have the courage to kind of rebel against that culture and be, you know, fit into that stereotype. So I mean,
Islam, the Islamic culture,
not Islam, but a culture that my parents were trying to preserve that I did not really relate to. So I had two very distinct identities growing up, and this is like high school, middle school, and all that. So I was a Muslim. So with that, I was going to Sunday school every Sunday, and which was actually a really wonderful experience. Unlike my children who don't want to go to Sunday school, I really enjoyed it because it was an opportunity to meet. It was actually like being a part of the United Nations. At that time, the Muslim community was so small. We had Black Muslims, we had Middle East, from the Middle East, Syrian, Palestinian, Somalian, North Africa, Egyptian, just all over. We were all together learning about Islam and learning about each other and our cultures, and then on the weekends we had our I'll call them auntie parties. So we were just sort of socializing with every other Muslim we knew in the community. We would have dinners at each other's homes like every weekend, and so the whole families would meet, and so that was one aspect. And then there was my life in school, which was completely separate and distinct from that, where, you know, I think, just sort of reflecting back now, I think I was certainly perceived as a little bit different and exotic, but I never sensed it in a negative way. I think folks were pretty much kind and cordial, but now looking back, I think maybe a little bit more distant than, because it was just a little bit different. The only bullying experience that I remember was I wore long pants in gym because a lot of practice modesty. I don't really, I've never worn shorts, and so I even when it was 80, 90 degree weather, I'd be in my thick sweatpants outside, and so I do remember a lot of snickering and kind of with the girls and all that. That kind of thing that I perceived. And so, but I don't think anyone really knew that I was a Muslim, and I never really discussed it in any way. No one really asked me, and I think even if I said that they were, it didn't even mean anything. I remember a geography class where a teacher would ask me to come every year and talk about my identity, the immigration piece of it, and I think the strangest questions I got, and this happened every year, was about arranged marriages. Everybody wanted to know. Yeah. You come from a culture where arranged marriages happen. How does that work?
Yeah. So we should totally talk about that at some point.
Yeah, sure. So that it was that. It was kind kind of just wanting to fit in and in school, but so when I went to college, I went to University of Virginia, is when I really started forming friendships for the first time with Muslims from all over the country, and just met a lot of people that experienced a lot of the similar things that I did, a lot of this sort of hyphenated identity, trying to manage it all, and so it kind of brought us together. And I mean, at one point, I even became the president of our Muslim Student Association and the vice president of our Pakistani Students Association, the country where I was born, but don't really have a memory except a couple of family visits for vacation. And so over time, I think I started really becoming very comfortable in being a Muslim, and I also overcame that level of shyness. I think I'm still an introvert, but as far as just sort of being really confident in my own skin, one of the pivotal experiences that I had was going to Jummah in a chapel. Jummah is our Friday prayers, so our holy day is Friday, and every Friday we have prayers with sermons. And so our sermon and our prayer was in a chapel. And if you're familiar with UVA, it's the colonial Jeffersonian architecture, and then there's this like Gothic chapel in the middle of the grounds, and with stained glass windows and all of that, and that's where we prayed. That's where we did our Muslim prayers every Friday. And we had a professor, Siddiqui, who gave the most beautiful sermons with an echo that happens in a chapel. Very peaceful, beautiful experience that strengthened my faith profoundly. And I would say that I was the most practicing ritualistic wise when I was in college. I would go into the confessional room to do my prayer, the 5-time prayer thing, just on my own. And so I had a sense of belonging more so than in high school, where my friendships sort of started and ended in the classroom setting. So where my identity was completely separated, then it sort of coalesced
in college.
And I just felt very comfortable being Muslim and American and all of that.
That's interesting, because that's like the opposite story of most people. Like,
really?
They're religious in high school, and then they get to college, you're like, I'm free, and I can do whatever I want. And so they're like, screw God, who needs him? So
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's very interesting that you had the opposite experience. That's very cool.
Yeah, because when I was younger, it was just kind of like, I just wanted to be like everybody else. I didn't want to be different.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, because you talked about going to your services on Friday nights, have you ever been to services for any other religions? Because I would be interested to hear differences if you have. If not, that's fine. But I was just something I was curious about.
Yeah, I over the years I've become really active in interfaith kind of stuff, and I enjoy learning about different religions and the way they're practiced. When I was in high school, I used to go to Hindu garbas with my friend and sort of partake into that and eat the prasad, which is the holy. I participated in Hindu religious activities just to learn about it. I actually used to go to mass in college.
Really?
With a friend of mine, Chris Haddad, actually. He is Palestinian Christian, and so I had met him, gotten to know him, and so I learned about the Catholic faith, and I attended Mass a lot, and I really liked it, and it gave me a feeling of peace.
Really?
Of course, I didn't drink the wine or take the bread,
I've been to Mass once. I'm Protestant, and so I didn't partake in the drinking the wine or eating the bread, because I didn't feel it was appropriate even for me.
Right. It was. I thought it would be
Catholic.
disrespectful. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So I didn't do that, but I did it to understand and found a lot of commonalities. I think I've taken my children. For me, it's important to share all of that with my children. I've taken them to Mass, especially like Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Just because I wanted to. Kind of experience it, and it's I don't know. I think it's very similar.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and I have been to synagogue a couple of times. I've met a rabbi who participates in interfaith stuff. So we with Muslims. So we sometimes do events in like in a church or in a mosque or in a synagogue. So in that way, I feel very comfortable.
Your Friday services, are they done in English or are they done in another language?
They're in English. We have several mosques in Richmond. The one I've been going through since I was a child is the one on Buford Road, the Islamic Center of Virginia, ICVA. And
interesting. Yeah, I was actually talking to your mom about maybe bringing him in.
You absolutely should.
Okay, I'll tell him we talked.
Yes, please do. I have so much respect for him. I think I feel like I can connect to him because he was born and raised in the United States. He was a convert, and he helps me understand. Like if I'm really confused about something, like I'll read something about like female genital mutilation. I'm just like, what's up with that? And I feel very comfortable just going up to him and saying, well, what is Islam? What is the? Because there's so much culture and patriarchy and religion sort of conflated together, and so trying to separate that is always challenging, and so the imam is there to help figure some of that out. But I feel very fortunate because he's the only imam that I know of that grew up here, and so we can relate, and I have seen imams that I cannot relate to at all. And there's a really wonderful imam at the Adams Center in Loudoun County. He's actually, I think he's Somalian by birth, and he's an immigrant, and he has a bit of an accent, Somalian accent, but he just really gets it. I mean, he's just he's really wonderful. So I think those experiences with imams really can shape. And as I said, the experience that I had with my professor of Islamic studies leading the chapel, because it was a sort of an intellectual, because he's an intellectual academic, the way he shared the religion, the ideas, the sort of the just the stories were just, I could relate, I could understand it. Yeah. Unlike going to I'll walk out in the middle of a khutbah sometimes when I get frustrated. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me ask you one more question. It's kind of a your experience kind of question, and then I want to kind of begin diving into Islam. What has been the difference being a Muslim before 9/11 and after 9/11 in your experience?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the it's definitely a challenge. It was being a Muslim is an important part of my identity, but not something that I really wear on my forehead. I don't really, and I don't wear hijab. I don't, so I think you might presume I am because of the color of my skin, or just, or not. I never really felt that I was looked at negatively or treated negatively until after 9/11 is when it started happening. And so that was really difficult. I was pregnant at that time, and so I was really, I guess I didn't sense how much it would change and how challenging it would be. I think the last couple of years have been even more challenging than 9/11 to say. I think maybe because I have kids, because before I just had to worry about myself, and my younger ones were really, really small, but more recently, as they've gotten older, they need to figure out their identity. And I want to instill in my children the same sense of pride of the identity that I sort of grew up with, and I was able to kind of reconcile some of these things without all of these outside people saying, your religion is bad, it's evil, it teaches, and I know that it doesn't, and I understand, and I recognize, and I acknowledge that there are extremist interpretations of Islam that I actually myself had never been exposed to until 9/11, and so I just that is definitely a huge challenge. I want them to have a sense of pride. Okay. And that's actually why I'm here today. My husband keeps asking me, "Are you sure you want to put yourself out there?" The first time you heard my TED Talk, but before that, I wrote like something in the paper when I got really mad one day. I was driving home from soccer practice or something, and then I think one of the candidates running for president, I think it was Mr. Carson at that time, I can't remember, but something about how Muslims should not be allowed to become president or something like that. And my two boys are born in America, and they have an absolute right, if they can earn it, to become president. And then there's this thinking, and how does that affect you? And so I was just so upset and angered and scared about what's happening to my country. This is my country too. And so that's when I wrote this. And I think it was a very watered down, simplistic, like, kumbaya kind of unity, and we need our leaders to stand up for us, and blah blah blah, because we're just as part of the American fabric as anybody and any other immigrant that came here, from the Irish to the Italians to any, we're just so that was basically what it was about, and I received a death threat, which is so it was interesting because I never realized at that time that it was, that's something I should have thought about, that I'm putting myself out there, because I've never perceived myself as something less than. I mean, I'm proud of who I am. And I had several Muslims come up to me and say, that was so courageous for you to write that. And I'm just like, really? How? Because there's a lot of us who are just kind of like, we're Muslim, but it's on the low, We don't want to, we're proud of it, but we just don't want to invite all these stereotypes, and frankly, we're not in the mood to kind of defend ourselves. We just don't want to deal with it, a lot of us. The state police, I think, they kind of investigated. They did their own investigation, and they met with me, and they told me that it was actually a Christian right-wing group who they think operates out of a basement somewhere, very small, kind of. That was they were doing their own investigation on this, but that was the information that they shared with me.
Well, I'm sorry that happened.
Oh no, thank you. And then they taught me how to kind of become a little bit more private. But anyway, I say that all because every time my husband asks me, "Do you really want to put yourself out there again?"
This is what's in the back of his head.
Yeah, and then my family, but to protect my family, but I kind of feel like I have to, because this is protecting my family and the future of others, just to kind of hear our voices. And
Okay. Well, before we start diving into some of the ideas in Islam, I want to go on a real quick tangent. So I hear people say, when you speak out against Islam, they say, "Oh, you can't do that. That's racist." And to me, the term race, Islam is not a race. Yeah. And so I've always been bugged by this. Once again, this is just a tangent. Would you say it's a racist thing, or would you say no? Islam is it's a religion. It's a form of ideas.
Yeah. I think what we're doing in our kind of racism, the idea of racism is the idea of oppression. It's the idea that one race is superior to the other, to another race, and so it's a hierarchical system of racism, and I think there's the idea of institutionalized racism and critical race theory that sort of explores this notion of this hierarchy of race and power. It's about having a certain group. I think it's typically considered the white male Christian Protestant heterosexual. All of these things are considered, and then the oppression happens with female. Female. Non-white, and so I think it's used broadly in that respect as an oppression of either religion or race, but I kind of look at it as just social inequality. But I think when people say racist, I think they're talking about these power dynamics of superiority, that kind of thing. Okay.
Well, I was curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, that's just sort of how I look at it. So if someone is saying something un-Islamic and somebody says that it's racist, maybe I can't speak for why they're using racist. Yeah, but that makes me think about the power dynamic structure, that you think this religion is less than.
So we already mentioned, what your experience was like before and after 9/11. So the fear obviously came from extremist groups in Islam. Right. And so people definitely fear that there's some ideas and concepts in Islam that teach people that if you're not a Muslim, that you can attack non-Muslims. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this fear of these, we're talking about these radicalist people that sort of, they use Islam to justify their violence. That's sort of how I see it. And just as you are afraid of it, I am afraid of it. I am afraid of that violence. I am afraid of people interpreting Islam in that way. It brings fear in my heart, and I think it's. And I think that, when we talk about ISIS and Al-Qaeda, these are primarily the groups that are sort of recruiting Muslims, especially young Muslims, through websites and internet and all of that, to kind of fall into their way of thinking that that we need. The world is so corrupt. We need an uprising and like a revolution, and we need to go back to the pure days of Islam when Islam was first revealed. That's the mindset. And so that is used as the premise to justify killing people, whether they're non-Muslim or Muslims who do not agree with them.
Yeah, because you don't wear a hijab, so
yeah, I don't wear a hijab,
so
and
you could be
also
punished, right?
By ISIS?
By extremist groups.
Yes, possibly, yeah. And so the other thing that I really want to say is that Muslims have been the greatest, overwhelming number of victims to ISIS. Every day when you hear about bombings and things like that are happening, they're happening in Pakistan, they're happening in Syria, they're happening in Iraq, they're happening, and they're killing Muslims, they're killing Shias because they're a minority Muslim, or they're killing, they're killing Muslims mostly.
Yeah.
They're targeting the West also. Their target is the West, but their target is also the Saudi government. If you think about it, because that's also, they're targeting anyone who practices Islam or doesn't practice Islam in a way that is not, does not align with their sort of thinking.
Yeah.
That is the highest form of oppression. That is, the most oppressive way of practicing a religion. If let me give you an example of modesty. You brought up hijab. So one of the core tenets of our faith is modesty by women and modesty by men. So
men are included.
Yeah, men are absolutely included in the definition of modesty. And what that means is, and you'll find a lot of very pious men who won't make eye contact with women. Not out of, you may think out of disrespect, because we're taught eye contact is and I have eye contact with you right now.
Exactly, yeah.
But the fact that they, do not want to disrespect women, or they're supposed to be modest, or they sort of bend their,
Are they lusting after these women, or are they, if they have their eyes away from them,
right.
don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, like their Arabic teacher at our mosque, he's just so like when he talks to me and he's kind of looking down and and I just feel so respected by that. Like he's, because I understand that culture.
You understand why he's doing what he's doing.
I understand that culture, yeah.
Other people
but
would see
again,
it as maybe like he doesn't have confidence in what he's saying,
right?
Or whatever.
But it's but it's time or place. I don't know what he does. I think he's an optometrist, but but maybe at his place of work he is different. You
kind of have to look in someone's eyes if you're an optometrist. Yeah.
So if I were to be engaged in a conversation with a Muslim man, I may not shake his hand depending on how comfortable I feel.
Sure.
But if I'm in a work setting, I will absolutely. And I know my mom has no issues with that. He's I don't think that I'm being un-Islamic or not. It's
or
just
not modest by shaking someone's hand.
Right. Yeah. So the idea of modesty is core in our faith, and so certain interpretations they're interpreted that in the Quran it says kind of lower your cover your bosom or something like. I can't speak as an authority, but so the interpretation of that has been like, okay, you have to take a veil that covers your face. Some people interpret it as, you've seen those long abayas. So you don't see your figure, like your curves and all that.
So it just completely covers you So
Yes.
there's no way that, okay, interesting.
Yeah. So that's a that's sort of a very it's practiced by a very small minority of Muslim women. Although in the media it's portrayed as much more. I would say less than 1%, if I had to guess, actually practice that extreme.
Okay.
And then you have those, and then you have those like my sister who wears loose clothes. She covers her head, and she wears loose clothing. And then me, it's like a spectrum. So me, I wear like some of my friends don't wear short sleeves, or they only wear pants. I've never worn shorts before, so to me that's modesty. Or I don't wear tight, revealing things, and to me that's my definition of modesty. So it goes like that. So when you're looking at the ISIS interpretation, you're basically, it's not. I mean, I would say that it's not even Islam. It goes 10 steps beyond this woman in a abaya, in the sense that it's actually conflated with patriarchy, that women need to be submissive to men, or I mean, I think they have sex slaves. I mean, how is that Islamic?
Yeah.
So they're just sort of using Islam to justify the violence. The problem with that is that I don't think a lot of Americans understand that, or most Americans understand that, that we're just as terrified by this form of Islamic extremism, if you want to call it. I mean, most Muslims hate putting those words together. They're like, and that's a big deal with Obama and Trump about, why don't you use the word Islamic terrorism? Why don't you put them together? Because terrorism is not Islamic. It's anti-Islamic. And when you put those two words together, you're basically saying that it's sanctioned in Islamic faith. And that's why we get so upset when someone puts it together. I think we acknowledge, and I think there's plenty of Muslims who have their head in the ground and don't understand that it can happen. I mean, extreme radicalization can happen to anybody, and it has happened. We've seen that. We've seen young teenagers or people in their 20s who are going to Syria to go to training camp, and they, I mean, we're seeing that happen. And I think a lot of the efforts are being focused on by I guess by CIA, FBI, whoever does that, in trying to get into those networks. And so there's also the idea, and I'm a little bit of my research, my dissertation research focuses on the fact about, the youth in Europe. We've seen a greater amount of radicalization of Muslim youth, right? And there have been a lot of studies that show that Muslims in Europe, let's just say England, are not having the mobility the way Muslim immigrants are in the United States. Like their parents will come, their parents' children will come, they'll be here for generations, but they won't be able to get out of their for lack of a better word, their ghetto. I don't want to say that word, but they have their neighborhoods that are segregated, and they're kept segregated, and there's a lack of government and institutions to work on kind of doing better integration. And so the amount of racism is, or if whatever you want to call it, the discrimination, that's a better word. Is just doesn't seem to be going away. And so there are a lot of studies saying that that it's actually the alienation of this group that is kind of perpetuating this sort of us versus them mentality, and this whole thing of kind of segregation and this sort of not feeling equal to other Europeans that have been here, not feeling that they're treated equal to other Europeans, but we're not seeing that here, I think, but I don't know if that's changing, because now there seems to be an idea of there seems to be an increasing us versus them thinking going on that we've never seen before, and I hope that it doesn't become like that. I hope that we can unite rather than Muslims, non-Muslims separate. That we're all together. That we're actually one. We have different ways of worshiping, and our enemy is the same. Radicalism is our. We need to be fighting against it. We all do. We all not just and yeah. rather than attack our own people, right?
Yeah.
For being Muslim.
And I've heard one of the reasons that you see the radicals even attacking Muslims and being okay with it is that apparently, and correct me if I'm wrong from what I was researching, the mindset is that if they die and they're doing what they're supposed to do, they're going to go to heaven. So we're doing them a favor. But if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, they die, then they go to hell or wherever, and we're doing what the Quran is telling us to do. Is that pretty much the mentality of these groups?
So, as I was talking about interpretation of modesty as an example, so I'm sure you're familiar with the word jihad.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's sort of, so what jihad translates to in Arabic is struggle. It means struggle. So I grew up with the idea of understanding jihad as a struggle within myself to become closer to my Creator. Okay, and some of the sort of impediments that you face that distance you from God or having that relationship with God, right? And so we all struggle to become more pious, to become more religious, and so that is what jihad has always been to me. Now there's there's an interpretation of jihad which includes martyrdom, like sometimes when things are so unbearable, when the struggle is so severe, and that's talking about like oppression, like if you're, for example, if you're being persecuted because you're Muslim, or then there are certain circumstances where you rise up against that oppression. So
it's in there, but they're twisting it.
Yes, that's my understanding of it, and I think that's how most Muslims see that. They're taking this beautiful concept of jihad, which is meant to become closer to your Creator. Like become more pious and more and what is it? It's about being kind to your neighbor. It's about doing good deeds. I mean, those types of things, and then taking it to say that we have to kill these infidels because they don't practice the way we practice, and that's how they're using jihad, right? The idea of martyrdom.
Okay, so from my research, I have of the videos I've seen or what I've read has said that Muhammad himself was a warrior. So in Christianity, where Jesus was. I heard someone say it was like a hippie who happened to die on the cross, where he was like love and peace. I'm trying to bring people together. He did say some things that were like, I've come to bring the sword, I haven't come to bring peace. But overall, you see Jesus saying, love your neighbor, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yes.
Love God primarily, love others secondarily. So some of the questions I have is that, Muhammad also married a girl that was like 12 or 13, and it's documented that he beat her. And so these are some of the things we see in Islam that people are saying we're not being extremists. We're following what Muhammad did. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, sure. So my thoughts on, well, first I'll just say that I don't know how familiar you are with the Islamic sort of story of Jesus. We believe in all the things that you cited, the characteristics that you cited of Jesus. We also believe all of that. It's in the Quran, the story of the virgin birth, Virgin Mary, and his powers of healing and love and the hippie sort of and I mean he's my favorite prophet. We see him as a prophet, and we have he's referred to as Isa in the Quran, and so we have a lot of love, and we're supposed to kind of emulate our prophets, and he's one of the prophets we sort of emulate. But then the one who brought the Quran, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the one you refer to as a warrior, is another person we emulate. And there's a lot of hadith out there, which is like sayings of the prophets, or hadiths are kind of they're not Quran, but there's sort of interpretive texts of stories of what happened, like, you know.
We got commentaries for the Bible.
Right, exactly.
Like explaining
things,
what it's talking about.
Right, deeds that he did that we should kind of follow, which was living he lived with a lot of humility, and so we should live with humility, and I've always learned from the stories that I read that he treated his wives with utmost respect, and my understanding is that the wives that he did had, and by the way, my name is Maimuna. I'm Mona, but my actual name is Maimuna. She was one of the wives of the Prophet, but a lot of those marriages were for bringing tribes together, and you know, for spreading the religion. That's my understanding. Probably the Imam could give you a better explanation of that. Yes, one of his wives, Hazrat Aisha, was very, very young, and that's absolutely true. But I think, you know, I'm not going to justify anything, but I think it's how you look at it. My mom was married when she was 16. My aunt, who probably is 20 years older than my mother, so she was born in 1937, was married when she was 13. And so, you know, and you're talking about, you know, back in the day, so when, you know, when you put it in the context of today's culture, you know, it's almost blasphemous, but in the culture at that time, I think it was very, very different. Okay. I mean, the life of a woman was how long compared to, you know, today, if you think about it. So I think looking at the context is really important. It's easy to, and I was gonna, there are texts in the Quran, like stories. I have heard that, you know, the beating of the, you know, I've heard that, and there are certain things, and of course that's not in the Quran. So it's probably something else. But you know, I think pulling the text out or just certain sentences out without the context is a little bit problematic without looking at the whole context of something, like the time that it happened in, the stories and these types of things. And so when I am confused and I don't understand, I do reach out and ask my mom. And some of these things satisfy me. Sometimes, you know, the way I've been explained to satisfies me. Sometimes they don't. You know, like the idea of property, you know, rights of women. I think before Islam came, women had no property rights. So, so when Islam actually elevated women's status by saying, well, no, they have property and property rights, whereas before they didn't. And at that time, I think, I mean, there's an explanation for it, and you should probably ask the Imam, and it made sense to me. But a lot of things don't satisfy me. Yeah. But I think, you know, that doesn't really lessen my faith in God. And I think it just, I think it does, though, lessen my desire to be stuck in that institutionalized religious practice. Sure. And sort of look at Islam as a spiritual guide for myself. And I think these stories are troubling. And I think we have a lot of these types of stories that in modern times just really seem bizarre, not just in Islam, but in all the Abrahamic faiths. I mean, yeah, and I was going to say that, you know, there are definitely passages in Scripture for me when I read the Old Testament specifically that. You know, there's a prophet who called down some bears to eat some kids. Like, I have a problem with that, and so definitely trying to practice your faith and say, you know, hey, you know, I see so much good in this. Yes. What do I do with this? Right. But you know, my argument to people who don't like have a faith in God at all. Yeah. Is that they have their own issues, that you have to kind of disconnect certain things. Like, if there's no God, how did the universe come into existence? If in physics, you know, matter can neither be created nor destroyed. So you just have to accept that matter was just created out of nothing. Right. And so there's, in any belief you have these moments where you're like, okay, I just got to kind of put this to the side. Exactly. You know, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think, you know, growing up as a person of faith, I've always had these challenges. I consider myself a radical feminist. That's another piece of my identity that and so I have a lot of trouble with some of the ways, you know, we handle things at the certain ways that we handle things that I challenge all the time. But you know, it doesn't change my faith in it. But I think we all, like, if you're a person of faith, you've had those challenges.
Yeah.
But what's ultra challenging for us now is that now we're also having to justify that our religion is peaceful when we have all these crazy people killing thousands and thousands of people in the name of the religion.
Yeah.
You know, that's another piece now that we're battling with.
So do you think that's going to be on you guys as Muslims to kind of, take care of what's in your own backyard, or do you think it's a job of like the world as a whole need to come in and some of the countries in the Middle East say like this is not okay that you guys are doing this stuff? Like what is the way you see
so
forward?
When you say backyard, just because I'm a Muslim doesn't mean it happened in my backyard. For example, if there's a Christian, like I believe you're a practicing Christian.
Yeah.
If there's a Christian who kills in the name of Christianity, which we have a lot of documentation of, we have Hitler based his killings on Christianity, right? The Jews.
I've gone back and forth on that.
Well,
from what I've studied. So.
Yeah. So I
would
may
say
be
like
wrong,
slavery would be a better one because I know for sure there's documentation of their churches that were promoting slavery.
Right.
And so I would still say, but that's in my back, so I need to deal with that. So I need to go to those groups and say either go to them or I need to tell like the media at large and say these guys have nothing to do with us.
Okay. So you do feel that it is your responsibility?
Yeah, I would feel it's my responsibility as a Christian, if I'm a practicing Christian, that you have the church. I forget the church's name that was in the South that was like going to military funerals and
Westboro.
Yeah, okay, so Westboro is disgusting, and so my argument would be. And OJ, my producer, and I were kind of discussing this before you came in. My argument is not that they're. And this might go along the lines of what you were saying earlier, that these are extremist Christians. No. Who were we saying? Shoot, I forgot her name again. Mother Teresa. I would say Mother Teresa is an extremist Christian. She's taking the teachings of Jesus, love God and love others, and she is taking it to the extreme.
Yes.
Whereas I would say that with a church like Westboro Baptist, I would say they're not Christians at all. Just like if I went into a Democratic National Convention and said, hey, I'm a Democrat. And they're like, okay, are you pro-choice? No, I'm actually pro-life. Okay, are you for bigger government programs? No, I'm actually against government programs. Like they would say, you're not one of us. And so that's what I would say about Westboro Baptist is that these guys have nothing to do with us because they're not actually following what the Bible says.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because I feel the same way about Islam, like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and anybody who preaches violence in the name of Islam, no matter what, is not Muslim. And I think that's what the majority of Muslims are trying to say. And I think we get double whammied about that because we're like, but they're saying they're Muslim. They're doing it in the name of Islam. I mean, how can you say it's not Muslim? You have, so we, but we don't think that their acts are Muslim in any remote sense of the word Islam. Their acts are completely un-Islamic, and they take on a piece of it. They take it and they use it to benefit their own political agenda, which is basically power. Right? And then we have, so an extremist to me, I'll give you an example of an extremist Muslim who recently died is Eidi, E-I-D-I. He's from Pakistan, and he is, not really known for his, he's a Muslim, not really known for his preaching or anything like that, but he spent his entire life saving children and taking in people who nobody wanted, helping religious minorities, figuring out an adoption system, like babies being left on his front porch, and he created this whole ambulance system, and he is just revered, and he just did good. And he did not get any money. I think he slept on the floor. He lived very simple. If you look at him, he looks like a villager. Okay. In these simple clothing that I think he wore every day. So and he's a pious Muslim. And so maybe perhaps I can say that's an extremist. That's an extremist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, before we get to the bonus interview section, I just wanted to say thanks for checking out part 1 of my talk on Islam with Mona Siddiqui. Definitely check out next week's episode where we debate a little on topics like whether Christianity has been helpful or detrimental to the progress of the U.S., and we even talk about the cake shop case that's currently in the Supreme Court. If you're looking for ways to support the podcast, head over to our Facebook page and click that like button. All the cool kids are doing it, so if you're trying to be cool, that's what you should be doing right now. Also, head over to our iTunes page and give us 5 stars and leave a review. This moves us up in the rankings so more people can hear about the show and we can continue to grow. Well, you, my friend, are awesome, and here's the bonus interview. Enjoy.
If you could be a guest on any television talk show, which would it be?
Oh, wow. Any television talk show. I don't know, maybe Trevor Noah.
Okay.
The Daily Show, I guess is what it's called.
That's your fan?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't watch it that much, but I read his book.
Okay.
And I just love his story about how growing up in apartheid and how he navigated all that and got to where he is. It's pretty amazing.
Okay.
So yeah.
Trevor Noah. All right, cool. If you could repeat your life over again exactly as it was from any age, what age would you start from?
Or to repeat my life? Oh, college.
College years? Okay.
College years were really, really wonderful. Not high school.
Not high school. Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
If you could find one thing in your family attic besides money, what would you want to discover?
Oh gosh, if I could find one thing besides money, what would I want to discover? A cure for disease.
Oh, so like one of your family members had like a little journal that has like a cure written on it? That's great. Okay, very cool. I would have never thought of that. That's great. You're a better person than I am. Actually, what I was thinking was, if I was to find something, I'd want it to be like a journal from an ancestor that's like documents their life and be like, oh, you can read through and like find out about this person that's your great grandfather or something.
Yeah.
So I thought that would be
cool.
That
would be cool. I've often wondered where my parents come from, like 100, 200, 300 years ago.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
I bet you'd be super interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 4. What would you say is the single most important quality in a spouse? Actually, before we begin to that, did you have an arranged marriage or was it not arranged?
Well, I could do a whole interview on that.
Can we get the abridged version?
Yeah. Well, the abridged version is that I met him through family friends because once I graduated from college, my mom was like, you have to get married. And I was I refuse. So they set me up with this guy who knew that he was coming to see me, but that I didn't know that I was seeing him. Needless to say, 2 months later, we had our nikah, which is our religious ceremony.
Really?
So,
wow.
But I did get to know him, and my dad said that I must go out on a date with him alone before I make my final decision.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you call that arranged, I don't know.
I don't know.
So, I don't like being in the box.
Okay.
So,
that makes sense.
Yeah, and I've been with him for 23 years, and we've had our ups and downs, but I'm very, very grateful and very happily married.
That's great. That's good to hear.
Yeah. So then your question about the trait in a spouse.
Yes. Thank you for getting back to that. Yeah. So what is the single most important quality in a spouse?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is honesty and lifting each other.
Okay, so like encouraging each other and what they're doing.
Yeah, and supporting each other. Yeah, and supporting your dreams.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. I hear that's one of the great things about marriage is that you can set out a path.
Yeah.
That's like, this is where our family's going, and then you both like work together to get to that end destination. So
yep.
Very cool. Let's see here.